Momentum Funds at Work and the Gordon Institute of Business Sciences. And she formerly coordinated the South African SDG Hub. So we are very, very pleased to have her here tonight to tell us more about the human dimension of the future of work and to share some very insightful thoughts and trends that we all should be aware of. I thank you very much. Dr. Van der Berg is recording the session for us, so we can go and look back at it if it's needed. May I please ask that we'll give Dr. Selebi the opportunity to present her lecture. And if there is any questions or comments, you are welcome to pop them in the comment box. And then we will, at the end of the lecture, give Dr. Selebi the opportunity to answer all of the questions. So we'll have a Q&A session at the end. But please, we do encourage all of you to participate in the discussion and put your ideas down in the comment box so you don't forget to refer back to them. But let's get into this lecture as soon as possible. Thank you very much, Dr. Selebi. You can go ahead. I will stop sharing my screen if you wanted to share anything, and then you can go ahead.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Du Toit. Thank you for the opportunity. I hope you can see my slide. Let me just make sure before I get started.
We can see and we can hear you. Is there any, can we get some thumbs up if Dr. Selebi is audible to everyone? Okay, great, thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm always happy to have conversations with postgrads because I always tell my postgrads that, you know, at undergrad level, that the conversations are quite different. If you have any conversations at all with first years all the way up to third years, right? They'll just be sitting quietly in your class. But once you get to that honors and MPhil level, we really want to hear what your perspective is on various things that we are discussing. So as has been mentioned, I'm from the Center for the Future of Work at the University of Pretoria. And basically what we do is research on the future of work. So when we think of the future, I think sometimes we forget that we are shaping the future in the present, right? So everything that we are doing currently in the way that we work is shaping the future world of work as well. And we are also living in the future, right? Because the reality is that the way that we work now is very different from the way previous generations worked. Our perception of work, for instance, has changed. In the past, when people thought of work and how we worked, people tended to remain within certain disciplines or within certain fields for the entirety of their careers. Currently, that's not what really happens, right? So on average, people tend to change jobs and change careers. And even if you stay within the same organization, we're starting to see people shifting to different parts of their organization a lot more than we saw in the past, right? So the way that we work, our perception of work, because one of the things that we explore as well within the center is that work is a source of meaning for us as humans, right? So in the past, we saw work primarily as a way of contributing to society and primarily as a way of being able to provide for ourselves and our families, right? So that was the primary reason that we worked as human beings. But as societies become more and more advanced, we have begun to perceive work as a potential source, not even a potential source, but as a source of meaning for ourselves as humans, right? So our perceptions of work have changed, how we work has changed. Remote work, the fact that I can deliver this lecture in the comfort of my home, right, is a part of how the world of work has changed. So the way that we work has changed, our perception of work has also changed. But regardless of that, work remains a very important part of our lives. So it's very important for us to understand it. So at the center, we do research on the future of work, the changes taking place in the workplace, and how to assist ourselves as individuals and also the organizations that we are part of to adapt to those changes so we can survive and thrive within that environment. So I wanted us to talk about the human face of work, right? Because the reality is, when we look at the work environment and the changes happening in the work environment, our main focus tends to be on technology. Right now, I don't know why my presentation disappeared. Let me try share it again. So whenever we think about work and the changes taking place in the workplace, we tend to focus primarily on the technological changes, which is an important conversation because, of course, technology impacts the way that we work, right? But also, we tend to forget that the world of work is changing in a variety of ways, not just in terms of the tools that we have available to us. So not just in terms of the technological tools that are available to us, but the way that we use those tools as well is impacting the work environment. There's a study that I'm working on, for instance, currently, that looks at remote work and gender equality, right? Because the way that, based on the research and based on the findings of other researchers as well, the way that men and women tend to approach remote work tends to be a little bit different, right? So what we're finding is that females who engage in remote work perceive it differently from men that engage in remote work, right? Because of socio-cultural expectations that are placed on women that tend to be different from those placed on men, women tend to approach working remotely differently, right? In the sense that, and what actually motivated this particular study was a conversation that I had with a young woman who works for a remote school, basically an online school, right? So she teaches children basically from the age of around 6 all the way up until children at the age of 18, right? And one of the things that she mentioned was that when young children have two parents that are working from home and they're struggling with something online, right? So they're sitting in their online class and they can't figure something out. She said that 99% of the time, the child will say, oh, I'm struggling with this. I can't figure it out. Let me quickly go ask my mommy, right? So they rarely say, even though the father is also working from home, children will rarely say, let me ask my dad. I don't know, I think I got disconnected. I think I got disconnected for a bit there. Am I still with you? Are we still together? Just need thumbs up.
We're still here.
Are you still there? Okay, great. Thank you, Enzile. Much appreciated. So generally, what was observed was, and when she asked these young children, why is it that you never ask your fathers for help? They would always just say, yeah, but dad is busy, right? So naturally, and also socially, the way that we tend to approach remote work, even based on gender, tends to be a little bit different. So that then begs the question, what are organizations doing to make sure that we provide a more supportive environment so that regardless of a person's gender, that they are able to benefit from remote work equally? One of the things that we've noticed as well in our research, especially as it pertains to gender and remote work, is that, of course, perceptions, again, of remote work tend to differ amongst different genders, but also we find that regardless of this shift to working more remotely, a person's ability to be promoted within the work environment still remains very heavily grounded in your visibility in the workplace, right? So when remote work is offered, women that are partnered are more likely to take the opportunity to work remotely than a man that is partnered, right? So sometimes, when you have children in the home and you're working, it can be a little bit noisy, and you know how it gets, right? So men are more likely within that environment to say, I would rather go to the office and get a lot more done, right? And what that leads to is more visibility. So visibility is still a very important aspect within the work environment. Your ability to be promoted very often is based on how visible you are within the workplace. So if women tend to gravitate more to working remotely because it allows them to balance all of these other responsibilities that they have in the workplace, is it potentially disadvantaging you in terms of your visibility, right? So these are all things that when we think of the future of work, we tend to only focus on the technology, which is incredibly important, right? The technology is very important, but it's not the only aspect, or it's not the only factor that we have to consider. We have to consider how these technologies and interventions like remote work, which I love and I think is so fantastic, but how are these interventions impacting the workforce? And how do we create policies and environments that are mindful of these impacts, right? So that's why I titled this that the future of work is human. So it's not just about the technologies that are being developed and the different ways of working, but we have to consider how these different factors and changes that are taking place in the work environment are actually impacting people on the ground. So that's what we're going to talk about. A few years ago, I had a conversation with a friend of mine, and this was during COVID, right? So I have a friend of mine who's an extreme extrovert. So he's friends with everyone. And I can imagine that COVID and being cooped up in his home was very challenging for him. So I'm sure we all remember what that was like. We're in our homes, you can't go anywhere, and so on and so forth. So he approached me just when the lockdown restrictions were slightly lifted, and he said, oh my goodness, I need to get out of my house. I've put together a hike, so this little hiking trip, and he's invited a ton of his friends because, again, he has a lot of friends, and I was one of the people that he invited. And he said, okay, I want us all to go for a hike just to celebrate that we are finally getting out of the house and we finally have a little bit of freedom. So as we're out here hiking, I thought, okay, let me ask him more about himself and the work that he does, because I knew that he was a chartered accountant, but I didn't know much more than that, right? So I thought, okay, I'm going to be stuck with you for the next few hours. I might as well ask you more about the work that you do. So as we're conversing, I said, okay, so tell me more about what your job looks like on a day-to-day basis as a chartered accountant. Then he said to me, Ole, I'm not just a chartered accountant, but I am the CFO of a large multinational, right? So now I'm really interested because, of course, becoming a C-suite professional, I just feel like it takes a special kind of person, right? Because as universities and institutions of higher learning, we graduate a significant number of people every single year, right? But not all of us make it to that like C-suite top executive level, right? So I asked him, what do you think it is that separated you from everyone else that got the same degree that you got and put you at this C-suite level? And I thought that he was going to talk about his technical skills, right? That he's this incredible accountant and he was an A student and he's just amazing at all of the technical aspects of being an accountant. But he did not mention a single technical skill. What he said separated him from everyone else was what we call soft skills. And I'm not a huge fan of the term soft skill just because it creates the impression of unimportance, right? That it's not really important. It's not something that you really have to take your time to focus on or build or develop, right? And then your hard skills, your technical skills, those ones are the ones that you really need to focus on. But he said what separated him was, yes, he was technically good at his job, but he was also very strong in terms of his ability to read people, his ability to communicate clearly with people, his ability to walk into a room and have a conversation with someone and read them and figure out what they wanted, right? And be able to clearly articulate himself in conversation. That's what separated him. And that's what we are finding as well, is that no matter how much the world of work is developing and changing, we are still interacting with human beings. Human beings are still on the receiving end of the work that we do. So our ability to connect with people, to communicate with people, and to develop those soft skills, that's becoming more and more important in the world of work. So it's not something that we can ever neglect or pretend is unimportant, because the reality is it's very important to develop those skills. So as universities, in most cases, we're good at helping you as a student to develop those technical skills. But a lot of those softer skills tend to be developed in daily life, right? In our interactions with other people and also in the work environment. That's where we develop those skills, right? The reason I'm able to have this presentation to you today is because I present on a daily basis, right? And that's a skill that I've developed in the work environment. So it's very important that we never neglect that even with all of these technologies being developed and our technical skills being developed to the extent that they are within the spaces that we find ourselves, one of the most important aspects of a future employer and employee is our ability to develop our soft skills. Soft skills is presentation skills, your communication skills, your critical thinking, problem solving, your ability to manage your emotions, right? So when things get really tense in the workplace, how good are you at managing that what you're feeling and not, combusting in front of everyone that you're working with? These are incredibly important skills, and as technology takes over a lot of the technical aspects of the work that a lot of us do, we still have to be able to communicate, problem solve, think critically, and so forth, right? Now, there was something very interesting that Elon Musk said a few years ago, and I'm going to play the video. I hope you'll be able to hear it. If you can't, then I'll just pretty much just explain what he was saying. But let me just play the video, and I hope it's audible.
I'm a big believer that people are more productive when they're in person. But there are some exceptions, but I kind of think that the whole notion of work from home is a bit like the fake Marie Antoinette quote, "Let them eat cake." It's like really, you're going to work from home and you're going to make everyone else who made your car come work in the factory. You're going to make the people who make your food that gets delivered, that they can't work from home. The people that come fix your house, they can't work from home, but you can. Does that seem morally right? That's messed up.
You see it as a moral issue?
Yes.
I mean, I see it more as
it's a productivity issue, but it's also a moral issue. People should get off the goddamn moral high horse with the work from home bullshit. Because they're asking everyone else to not work from home while they do. The laptop class is living in La La Land.
Okay, so he calls us the laptop class, right? And I don't know what you think of this perspective, but Elon Musk, even though he's seen as, well, now it's debatable, it depends on your perception, but one of the greatest technologists of our time, right? And one of the, not even one of, he is the wealthiest person on the planet as far as we know. He sees working from home, or the ability to work from home, as a class issue. And he perceives it as classist for certain individuals to work for an organization but have flexibility, whilst in his case, because he develops motor vehicles and all of these other different technologies, he feels that it's unfair that certain individuals, because of the type of job that they do, cannot work from home. They cannot have that flexibility. So he sees that as classist. Now, of course, it's a bit ironic coming from the richest person on earth, but you'll let me know what your perception is. So during the same time that he released this video, he released an email that you can see on your screen.
I'm a big believer.
To some of the executives within Tesla, right? And he said to them that remote work is no longer acceptable. So that was the title of the email. It went viral a few years ago. I think it was just before he bought Twitter. But this email went viral. So I'm guessing some of his executives, or one of them, leaked this particular email. And he says in the email, he says, anyone who wishes to do remote work must be in the office for a minimum, and I mean a minimum, of 40 hours per week, or depart Tesla, right? So there's an ultimatum there. You either work in the office for at least 40 hours a week, which to me, there's no flexibility there, right? If you're already working 40 hours a week, you've done your part, I feel, within an organization, right? But he's saying 40 hours in office, and then if you work an extra 20 hours a week, you can do that from home. So that's what he says. He says if there are particularly exceptional contributors, I don't know why my screen keeps doing that, but I will continue. He says if there are any particularly exceptional contributors for whom this is impossible, I will review and approve those exceptions directly. Moreover, the office must be a main Tesla office, not a remote branch office, right? So he believes, even though he is considered a very innovative person, he still perceives the way that work happens to be very traditional, right? So in his opinion, for you to work and to be effective, you have to be at a particular location to do that, right? Which is quite interesting and ironic considering the type of work that he does, right? So I don't know what you think of Elon's perspective, but perhaps we can talk about that a little bit after the lecture, right? So one of the things that we notice in the world that we currently work in is a shift in economy, right? So we now have what's referred to as the cognitive economy, that there is an economy that has developed around the mind, right? Around that people actually now get paid not for developing a physical product or service that they can sell in exchange for money, but people are now able to develop entire economies around ideas, right? So the cognitive economy is a big part of the current and future world of work that we didn't see on this scale in the past. The cognitive economy refers to an economic system where value is primarily created through knowledge, through ideas and mental labor, right? Rather than your physical labor. So in the past, the primary way for a person to generate an income or to generate revenue was primarily based on physical labor. You had to physically go out and farm in a particular space and develop a physical fruit or vegetable that would be of value to someone else, right? But in the cognitive economy, we see that there is an economy that surrounds the ability to create value through your knowledge, your ideas, and your mental labor. So in simpler terms, this is an economy where thinking, learning, and innovating become the greatest sources of productivity and growth. So that's the world that we currently live in. And key features of the cognitive economy are that it focuses on knowledge-based work. It focuses on lifelong learning. I'm sure this is a term that we've heard about so many times, right? That if you are part of the cognitive economy, which all of you are, then lifelong learning becomes a crucial and critical part of the way that you work. That it's not enough to, go to university at the age of 18, leave at the age of 21, and that would carry you for the rest of your life, and you didn't really need to upskill yourself in any major ways, right? That's no longer how the world functions. Also, the cognitive economy focuses on new forms of value, which I've mentioned. Things like creativity, innovation, and intellectual property drive wealth. Also, it's highly technologically driven, right? So we use a lot of digital tools, AI and data. These are central to the way that the cognitive economy functions. And as I mentioned earlier, soft skills are more important. So for most graduates, you will find yourself being paid for your mental labor, right? So your ability to interact effectively with people becomes an even more important skill. So critical thinking, communication, emotional intelligence, being able to read the room is so important, and problem solving, these become just as important as technical skills in the cognitive economy. Another phenomenon that we've begun to see quite a lot because of this cognitive economy that's developing is the concept of job polarization. So job polarization basically refers to the growing divide in the labor market where your middle skill jobs are disappearing while low skill and high skill jobs are increasing. Okay, so it basically, you have to think of the world of work and changes in the world of work in a U-shaped pattern, right? So like the letter U, right? So we're starting to see on the upper end of the U, your low skill jobs, they're increasing, right? And your upper skill jobs, your high skill level jobs, the kinds of jobs that you are all doing, right? We're starting to see those types of jobs increasing because those are part of the cognitive economy, right? But what we are starting to see a decline in right at the bottom of that U is your middle skill jobs. And those are jobs like bookkeepers, bank tellers, factory workers, right? These are individuals whose jobs are starting to become threatened more and more. So when we thought of the changes in the world of work and who's going to lose their jobs, we tended to focus more on individuals who are less skilled, so individuals with low levels of skill. That was the assumption, was that if a person has very little skill, then that individual is the one that will probably be out the door first, right? But we've noticed that that's not actually the case. The case is that with the introduction of technology and with changes in roles in the way that people work, we are actually seeing more of a decline in middle skill jobs. So people who have high levels of skill and function within the cognitive economy, those individuals are not struggling to find employment or to survive in the work environment. Also, people with lower level jobs are not struggling to find employment as much. The individuals who are struggling to retain employment are individuals like bookkeepers. When was the last time you employed a bookkeeper or heard of a person who works as a bookkeeper? Bank tellers, when was the last time that you walked into a bank and had to complete a transaction with the help of a physical human being, right? But the person who develops the app that you use, your APSA app, your Capitec app, that's an individual whose job is pretty secure, right? Because we transact using these devices every single day. But the individual who's actually working in the branch, who has a middle skill level job, those are the individuals whose jobs are actually under threat more than anyone else, right? So in the cognitive economy, such roles are replaced by AI and algorithms, right? So there's accounting software now, so you don't need a bookkeeper as much. ATMs, cell phone banking, right? Also, we're starting to see a lot of offshoring, right, of those mid-level jobs to cheaper labor markets. So for instance, if a person worked in a call center, right, we're starting to see a lot of these call centers are now being hosted in cheaper labor markets. So individuals who used to work in call centers, those jobs are also under threat, right? Then we have robotic processors. So if you call a call center and there's a robot that answers, I know it's very annoying, right? But that's the reality. A lot of those jobs are also being replaced by automation, by individuals in cheaper labor markets, and also by robotic processes. So these are the kinds of jobs that tend to be under threat. So it's not necessarily the person who mows your lawn, or the person who washes your car, or the person who helps you taking care of your children or your house, keeping it clean. Those jobs are not under threat. It's the individual with more of those middle skill level jobs. So low skill service jobs like cleaners, delivery drivers, security personnel, care workers, we don't yet have robots that can do that job. So those jobs are very secure for a significant period of time. Then your high skill cognitive jobs, software engineers, data analysts, consultants, designers, those types of jobs are expanding at a rapid rate. So these roles, they involve a lot of soft skills, creativity, critical thinking, problem solving. These are skills that are difficult for machines to replicate, and as a result, those ones are secure, at least for the near future, or the reasonable future that we can consider, right? So I think we're running out of time a little bit, so I'm just going to skip over some of that. But there are two possible futures then when we think about the future of work. There are two possibilities. Now, again, we don't know 100% what the future is going to look like, but based on our projections and the research that we're doing, there are two potential ways that the world of work could change. The first one is that we could see that because of technology, or the introduction of technology, the evolution of technology, the work environment could remain relatively similar, right? So here we would just have a more efficient version of what we already have today. So we would have professionals making use of technology. So the way that we work today, we use technology to streamline the work that we do and to optimize how we work. So we use technology as a tool to support ourselves as professionals. So it could stay similar, but the technologies will just get better, right? And then the second future that we could potentially face is a more disruptive future. That's where we have increasingly capable systems and machines which either are operating alone or designed by people. But in this scenario, technology potentially could fully substitute professionals, right? So those are the two potential futures. I don't know which one you think we are going to encounter in the next 10 or 20, 30, 40, 50 years, right? But it's important for us to think about, what future do we want? Which future do we think is the most sustainable for us as humans, right? Is it the one where things remain similar, which I would prefer, right? Better technologies, better ways of working. But I do believe that as human beings, work is in such an important part of our lives. And I don't believe any of us truly would want to sit at home all day and have nothing to do, right? So we have to consider, what could the future potentially look like? And because one of the major problems that we notice when it comes to these conversations on changes and the future of work is that a lot of there isn't enough preempting of these changes. We're not the technologies are adapting and changing much more rapidly than we as humans have the capacity for, in my opinion, right? And I'm just going to use a silly example of, for instance, at my institution, right? We have a lot of conversations around the use of AI, for instance. Should students be using AI? Should we be allowing it? If we do, how should it be used? And as much as we have policies in place that look into or that address how we as academics should encourage our students or potentially discourage them from using these technologies, as much as the policies exist, are they actually being implemented on the ground by, you know, your average lecturer, right? And it's difficult because probably we're all interpreting these policies and, you know, in our own ways and doing our own thing, right? So what that shows me is that the technology is developing at a much more rapid rate than we are prepared for as humans. And that's where the challenge comes in. What are the governmental policies around some of these technologies and their uses and introduction? Those are very important conversations that sometimes we aren't really having. So the transformation that we are seeing, it's already underway. In education, we have more people that signed up for Harvard's online course in a single year than attended the actual university in the entire existence of Harvard University. Now, I don't know how old Harvard is, but it's probably definitely way over 100 years old. In all of the time that Harvard University has existed, all the enrollments that they've had and students that have graduated from that institution, there have been more people that participated in online courses with that institution than ever physically walked through the doors of Harvard, right? So that shows us education is changing. In medicine, Stanford University researchers, they developed a system that can diagnose whether a person's lesion is cancerous or not from a photograph, right? So if I have a lesion on my hand, I could take a picture of it and I could send it off to, you know, this group of researchers, and there's a technology now that can help to diagnose that lesion without me physically sitting in front of a doctor, right? So medicine is changing. How we cure and deal with disease is changing. In terms of the legal field, JP Morgan, they use a program called Coin to scan commercial loan agreements. So this technology is able to do in seconds what it would take a human being 360,000 hours to do, right? So if you use a traditional lawyer and you're going to pay them 360,000 hours worth of their work and their time, that's a lot of money, right? So organizations are saving a lot of money, increasing their revenues as well by making use of these technologies instead of making use of a human to do that kind of work. So these are all ways in which different disciplines are changing because of the introduction and use of technology. So this is already happening. Now we just have to figure out how do we make sure that the evolution of technology and the changes that are happening in the work environment are taking place in ways that are not harmful to society in the long run. And sometimes those conversations are not happening. We're just excited about the tech, but we're not really thinking about some of the long-term effects of these technologies and ways of working. So when we think about the way that we work, it's important to think in tasks and not in jobs. So rather than viewing your profession as this monolithic job where you just do this one thing, right? We have to recognize that professional work consists of various tasks. So that's the best way to approach the use of technology, is to consider, if I as a lecturer have 10 tasks to complete in a day, which of those 10 tasks can be completely replaced by technology? Which of those 10 tasks can be completely automated, right? And which of those 10 tasks could I complete with a combination of technology and my own human intellect? and which tasks should not involve technology at all, right? And should I complete just with my own, mind and my own intellect? So it's important for us to think about, if we want to work effectively with technology, we have to think about technology as a way of supporting the work that we do, and think about the work that we do in terms of tasks and not as a complete job, right? Because technology is certain parts of that profession, or certain parts of the work that we do. And then also we have to think about professional work in terms of redeployment and not unemployment. So in the next few years, technology won't cause lots of people to lose their jobs completely, but people may have to move around, right? So many people will need to change what they do and how they do it. So we have to think of these changes in the work environment more in the sense of being redeployed, not unemployed. And also in terms of professional bodies, how will professional bodies change because of changes in the work environment? We identify several new roles for tomorrow's professionals, from data scientists to knowledge engineers, process analysts, and digital security guards. So many professionals don't recognize these roles, and if we don't recognize the fact that the way that we work is changing, the roles, the job roles, there are jobs that exist now that didn't exist 20 years ago, and there will be jobs that will exist 20 years from now that we currently do not have. So even professional bodies have to adapt to those changes in the workplace. So there are several moral questions that we also need to ask ourselves. And I had a little video here, but I'm not going to play it. I'll just kind of explain what the gist of it is. But we have to ask ourselves certain moral questions. Should all forms of AI and innovation, that's a controversial question, should all forms of AI and innovation be allowed within certain fields, right? Now, again, it's a controversial question, because in order for us to innovate, we have to allow people free rein to do so, right? So when we say, should certain technologies and certain changes and developments be allowed within particular contexts, it's a controversial question to ask, right? And an example of this is, for those of you that have traveled, right? So if you've traveled outside of South Africa, you've gone to maybe a much more industrialized country than South Africa, you will notice that the levels of automation tend to be higher than our levels of automation. So if you walk into a ShopRite type store to buy groceries, and you're in the Netherlands, for instance, it is not strange for you to walk into that store, pick out whatever it is that you want to pick out, and complete the entire process of purchasing whatever products you want to purchase without physically interacting with a human being, right? That's not strange. So you can go in there, you grab whatever you want to, you scan it, you tap your card to pay for it, and off you go, right? Now, within the South African context, would that model work as effectively as it does in other contexts, right? Probably not. And would it be ethical, even though ShopRite, I'm sure, has the ability to automate the entire processes within their stores, right? Would it be ethical for them to do so, right? Probably not, in my opinion, right? Because the socio-economic conditions of our country don't allow for innovation of that nature, or the introduction of technologies of that nature, because we have a very high unemployment rate. So the person that you interact with at the till in ShopRite needs that job. They're probably feeding 5 or 10 people from that job, right? So the ethical thing to do, even though it's probably cheaper for a company like ShopRite to introduce this type of innovation, is it the ethical thing for them to do? And again, that's the human question. So the technology is there, it increases your revenue, it's fantastic, it increases efficiencies. Human beings make mistakes, technology potentially would not make those kinds of mistakes, right? So you're cutting away a lot of potential issues. but would it be the ethical thing to do within the context? Those are moral questions that we need to ask around these technologies, right? Also, the trade unions would not be happy about that at all. That's another consideration. Another issue that we should be thinking about as well, or that kind of points to this particular point, was or is the conversation around AI and the replacement of certain art forms. Okay, so there was a controversial conversation that happened, I think it was about a year ago or 2 years ago, where Timbaland, so for those of you 90s kids, you're probably very familiar with Timbaland, because he's a very popular music producer, artist, person in the US. And he recently signed an AI artist, which is this, I don't know to call her young lady, right? So this AI person is an artist that he signed to his record label. And he was greatly criticized for doing this, right? Because people were saying, you as Timbaland benefited so much from a music industry that relied on organic, the development of organic creative ideas and music that came directly from people's minds, right? You benefited from that industry. Now you are signing an AI artist that is taking the job of a person who probably went to a Juilliard or some other incredible art school, right? But Juilliard, I think Juilliard just does dancing. I'm not sure, you'll have to clarify it for me afterwards. but a person that studied for several years at an art school or has spent their entire life honing their craft, right? So these are all moral questions that we need to ask ourselves. The technology is there, but how should it be used? Right? Should it fully replace certain individuals, or should it be used to replace certain tasks within the music industry? So there has to be some level of regulation, and we have to think around some of the policies that we are developing within our industries to make sure that human beings are not being disadvantaged because of these technologies. Right? So these are moral questions that we need to ask ourselves, is that are there certain tasks that machines ought not to perform? Are there uses of technology in the professions that we should prohibit, right? So an example of this is that courts use systems to assist judges in making parole decisions, right? So you can have a system that enables you or that supports the decision-making process for human beings. That to me is ethical, right? But would we be comfortable with a same or a similar system passing out a life sentence, right? Probably not. So we wouldn't want to outsource every single responsibility to technology, as great as these technologies are. We have to be mindful that we are working with technology and that we are not replacing important human functions with technology. An example of this is I work for a pension fund, right? So I'm on the board for a fund, basically. And technology is very useful to us because, you know, for instance, if a person was part of our fund and the person passes away, you know that typically you would have a list of beneficiaries that you want to inherit whatever you left behind, right? So we have very smart actuaries and they develop systems, and the technologists in the back end, you know, the actuaries will run all of the analyses, and you know, the programmers will then program the actuaries' thinking into these programs, right? And we could put in a person's information to say this person was this old, they had, you know, this many dependents, these were the people they wanted the money to go to, and so forth and so on, right? Then once the analysis has been run, then we as the board receive this division of assets, right? Because even if you were contributing to a pension, and you have, you say you want your grandmom to receive this much and you want this person to get that much, we still have to, based on dependency, determine exactly where all that money is supposed to go and to whom, right? Because sometimes a person passes away, and let's say, just hypothetically speaking, they had maybe 4 dependents, but they didn't know that they had a child somewhere out there, and the child is 3 years old. So let's say you've put 4 dependents, all 4 of those dependents are 98 years old, right? And we know that based on life expectancy, they probably don't have much more time left on earth, right? But we have this young dependent over here that is going to be alive for a lot longer. We would then have to, as the board, apply our human thinking to that scenario. And based on that human thinking, we then would determine to say, actually, the child should get a portion of the benefit, probably the larger a portion of the benefit, right? So technology is there to assist us. It should never fully replace the work that we do as humans, right? So we have to be mindful of that. Another thing that we are seeing, a trend that we are seeing in the work environment and in the way that people work, is the concept of digital nomads, right? And this is another conversation that we need to have, because again, there are ethical and social ramifications to this idea of, or this phenomenon of digital nomads, right? Because you know that if you are a young person working in the UK, you're fully qualified, you get a nice paying job that's paying you £100,000 a year, and it's an online job, right? So you're able to work fully remotely, but you are getting paid in pounds. And you decide, you know what, I've seen a lot of wonderful videos on Instagram about this fabulous place called South Africa. I'm going to move to Cape Town, right? Now you move to Cape Town with this fantastic salary of £100,000 a year. Okay, now I don't know how many young people are making that, but there are some. Okay, so you're making this £100,000 a year, which equates to about just over 2 million rand a year in rands, right? So if you are 25 or 30 years old with the exact same skill set as a South African graduate who is working for a South African company, but you are all living in the same neighborhood in Cape Town, naturally, the young person from the UK is going to outcompete you financially, right? And this is the big issue that we are starting to see when it comes to this concept of digital nomads, which are individuals that can basically live anywhere in the world and typically are earning salaries in currencies that are much stronger than the local currency. And we are starting to see a huge social issue developing around this, right? But again, what company policies are being developed to make sure that South African talent is protected? If we are to train our young people that are coming out of our institutions to also seek jobs in markets that have stronger currencies, what would the effects or ramifications of that be? What would the tax policies look like in a situation like that? If I was a young South African and it became very popular for us to work for companies in the UK, in the US, and various other places, what would the tax implications of that be? Would there be any changes or differences in the way that we are taxed, right? These are all things that are happening, but again, the technologies and the world of work are evolving at a much faster rate than we are seeing government and organizations being able to keep up with, or even making an attempt to keep up with these changes, right? So this young lady over here was complaining about basically what I just explained.
Cape Town is becoming unlivable for us, the youth, the middle class. Guys, let's be honest, we're barely surviving in this city. Did you see the food prices this month? Let me not talk about taxes. Somebody said we are the most taxed country in the world. Let me not talk about rent in Cape Town. We are literally being pushed out of the city. And we are sitting and we are quiet. All I'm saying is it's time, guys, not tomorrow, it's time. We as the youth of South Africa to stand up for ourselves. We need to do something. We need to do something. We need to stand. The same way they fought for Feast Must Fall. That's the same way that we need our voices to be heard. We need laws that are going to protect us from going out of the city, honestly. Like, we need to do something. Cape Town is becoming unlivable for us.
I'm going to end the video there, but she goes into a lot more detail. But I think you get the gist of what the lived experience is for individuals who are financially outcompeted by individuals who work in South Africa as digital nomads, right? So again, it's very important for us to think about how do we deal with some of these issues, but we're not having a lot of those conversations. So you can see this is a very frustrated young woman who's asking the question of what are we going to do to make sure that life in Cape Town, in our own country that you've been born in, right, remains equitable for individuals that do not have the levels of income that a person who's earning in pounds or in dollars has, right? Because naturally, and again, it's part of human nature, right? If I was a landlord in Cape Town and I got approached by one person who says, okay, I have 10,000 Rand here a month to pay for this apartment. And then here comes another person from the UK and they say, I'm willing to pay 30,000 Rand a month for that same apartment because they can afford to do that, right? Naturally, in this capitalist world that we are living in, naturally, you will probably accept the rent from the individual that's willing and able to pay more, right? But what happens on the ground to South Africans that are actually living in those spaces, right? So we have to consider that. Then I think probably this will be the last topic that I cover as I conclude. But I want to talk a little bit about a project that we are currently working on. We started working on this project last year as the center. It's called the Fair Work Project. So the Fair Work Project was started basically at Oxford University with a group of researchers there, and they have different institutions across the world that also contribute to that research. So this, as the Center for the Future of Work, we are part of that project, right? And what the Fair Work Project explores is the platform economy, right? So the platform economy, again, it basically deals with online platforms like Uber, Uber Eats, your Sweep South, right? So it's about these online platforms that connect you to certain services, right? So again, these are, when we look at that U-shaped job polarization that we talked about a little bit earlier, that's where your low-skill jobs exist, right? And these platforms, so if I have Sweep South, the Sweep South app on my phone, it enables me to, if I see, okay, my house is looking a little bit dirty, I'm working, I don't have the time to clean, I can quickly go on that app and say, can somebody come to my home to wash the dishes, to clean this or that, and I'd like to employ them to work in my home for 6 hours or whatever it is for that particular day, right? That's the platform economy. When you don't feel like cooking, and it's been a long day at work and you decide, okay, I think I'm just going to order something on Uber Eats, that's the platform economy. So you are employing a lot of people just because of the efficiency that these platforms provide. But one thing that we also need to think about is the potential exploitative nature of some of these platforms. Right now, I'm a big fan of the platform economy because it gives you so much efficiency, right? So it provides you proficiency at the touch of a button. But the problem with efficiency is that sometimes we forget that there is a human being that that needs to provide you that service, right? So while we are sitting in our homes, in the comfort of our homes, and the Uber Eats driver knocks on your door to come and deliver whatever it is, sometimes you go outside in the middle of the night, it's freezing, and you're thinking, my goodness, this person had to leave their home to come and provide the service, right? So we also have to consider that these platforms, as great as they are, and they're great at providing employment and an income for a lot of people, but we also have to be mindful of the potential exploitation that could come as a result of that, right? And conscientize these organizations to make sure that in their policies and in the way that these platforms are built, that they are still protective of the rights and the rights of the human being that is actually providing that service, right? So that's what fair work looks at. We look at fair pay, fair conditions, fair contracts, fair management, and also fair representation. So here's a quick video that kind of talks about the platform economy and its importance.
The ideal platform worker doesn't have any needs that are recognizable as human needs. They don't have a need to use the bathroom. They don't get sick. They can be dismissed at will, and when they are dismissed, they will go quietly. The platform economy is economic activity, labor, exchange of services that take place through digital platforms. I look at a specific subset of the platform economy called work on demand via apps, which is sort of what it says on the tin. The way that the platform is structured means that more work than ever is being demanded of workers for even less pay. And much of that comes through the sense of disposability. Uber drivers are expected to, on demand, have spot checks using a facial recognition software. Now, we know that this facial recognition software is much less effective at identifying black and brown faces. I was speaking to a driver of Bangladeshi descent, and at the time he had had a flare-up of eczema on his face, which caused his skin to darken, which is what tends to happen for darker skin tones, and he failed a spot check of this facial recognition software. So he was essentially immediately locked out of his livelihood, his only source of income, and for 3 months he was struggling to even get a response from Uber, just facing automated message after automated message, who, as far as they were concerned, there were 100 drivers behind him who would be able to take on the jobs that he wasn't able to take on. It was only when his MP had gotten involved that eventually Uber had enough pressure put on them that they actually reinstated him. But he wasn't compensated. I had spoken to countless other drivers who have been in the same situation who were never reactivated. It's much harder for workers to unite in response to that. Instead, they're sort of left fighting one-on-one battles with this massive multi-billion-dollar company. The platform economy was born in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis, where you have a crisis whereby access to stable and secure work has massively shrunk worldwide, and the people who are spat out of regular employment in that process are necessarily migrants, they're necessarily people in the global south, they're necessarily racialized minorities. And so that leads to a situation whereby these workers are having to turn to highly exploitative models because there is so little available to them. There are some specific things that would make workers' lives much easier, primarily things like workplace democracy, things like having workers be part of the process of how their work is organized. I think things like having a fair dismissal process, things like data transparency, algorithmic transparency, these things are incredibly important. But also much of these issues would be resolved if the broader structural inequalities that mean that particularly racialized workers are forced to say yes to these exploitative models, shifting that would make a massive difference. While you still have a workforce that is socially and politically disempowered, I think the problems are still going to continue to exist.
This Uber driver was just taking a few passengers to the airport when he experienced the most shocking thing ever in 25 years of driving. The guy next to him suddenly reached over and grabbed the steering wheel out of nowhere. But it didn't stop there. The driver hit the brakes and came to a full stop right in the middle of the highway. Then the guy randomly jumped out of the car and started running like he was on some kind of secret mission. This Uber driver...
Right, so the environment that platform economy workers find themselves in is not always a safe environment. I mean, just a few months ago, we had a young, I think he was a Bolt driver, not Uber. We all saw that story, who was murdered, by a person that alleged to, pretended that they were seeking his services as an Uber driver, but they actually had nefarious intentions, right? So what are the protections for individuals in this space? And if you listened to the young lady's video that spoke just before this second video that I played here, the platform economy, the way it's built, it's built in a way that could potentially be exploitative to workers, right? And the reason for that is, for me as an employee within the University of Pretoria, I have an employment contract, right? So I'm not seen as a freelancer. But for a lot of platform economy workers, that's how the work that they do is perceived, right? So for me at UP, if I had to fall sick, I can just put in my sick leave with my doctor's note, and that's the end of it, right? I can take leave for the whole week. And I still get paid for that week, right? But if I work for Uber, because there are so many drivers that exist within this Uber ecosystem, I can easily be replaced with somebody else. So you heard the example that she used of a young man who, again, because the systems are not programmed to recognize faces of different ethnicities as well, right? He got a bout of eczema, and now he couldn't scan his face anymore to verify his identity. And again, because we automate so many processes, there was no human being to listen to his complaint, to say, hey, this is what happened. Could I be able to verify my identity in any other way so that I can access my only source of income, right? That didn't happen until he went to his government representative, to the MP that lived in his area, and that was the only time that the issue was now resolved, right? Because they don't have typical employment contracts. They are seen as contractors or freelancers, right? So if you fall ill, you have no form of recourse to receive any form of compensation for the time that you are not able to work, right? So these are all things that, as these platforms are fantastic, they also have certain ways of being quite exploitative that we also have to consider. And just as I summarize, there was a slide I wanted to show you of this platform in the US called ShiftMed, and a few other platform-based platforms, where there were various stories of people in the healthcare sector that worked for these platforms, but found it very difficult to work because, again, everything has been automated within the system. So there was a story here. This young lady says, Crystal, a nursing student or a nursing assistant in New York, she uses ShiftMed. And technology disappoints you sometimes. She uses ShiftMed for supplemental income. So while she appreciated the convenience and the wages, she worries about the lack of supervision, right? Because you're using a platform. She's a nurse that a person can request on this particular platform to come to your home to take care of an elderly person or a sick person or whatever it is, right? But there's no one to supervise the work that you're doing. So if you're a young medical professional, in a traditional setting, you will have supervision to make sure that you're doing your work correctly. But with the platform economy, you have your qualification, you are welcome to walk into anyone's home and provide nursing assistance, right? So she says here, ideally, there should be a nursing supervisor that would check you in. And it's not very often that I'm even in the building with a manager, right? The second person, Aisha, It's Aisha, a nursing student in Georgia, was surprised by the isolation working for this particular platform. You really have no one to talk to, and even if you need help, there's no one for you to complain to if there's any mistreatment or abuse, right? That was something I wondered about with people who use, for instance, Sweep South. You're walking into the home of a complete stranger, right? So what are the protections for you if that complete stranger is not a good person? What happens to you? What recourse is there that you have against the organization or against that person? What do you do in those situations, right? What are the policies surrounding that? Then the final story here says, Kristen, a nursing assistant in Oregon who works for Clipboard Health, once developed appendicitis whilst moving a patient. So while she was working in a patient's home, moving that patient, she herself had a medical crisis. She says, yeah, I was on the floor in tears and throwing up from just the pain. And I could not get hold of anybody because, again, these platforms usually don't have a human being in the back end that can respond to complaints or issues instantaneously, right? So she couldn't get a hold of anyone, and I couldn't get approval to leave, and the paramedics left without me, right? So these are all factors that we have to consider. I was going to talk about gender and remote work, but I think I touched on that a little bit at the beginning. So again, just in terms of our key takeaways, is that digital transformation is human-centric, right? So it's important that even as we see organizations transforming digitally, we still have to be mindful of the human being that is making use of those technologies, and it still has to be beneficial to us as human beings. Job polarization, we spoke about that and how it's reshaping the way that we work. The cognitive economy is becoming a very, very large part of the way that we work. And people within the cognitive economy still, we and then inclusive leadership is a strategic imperative. So we have to have leaders that are inclusive in the way that we lead, right? So we can't just have these innovations without thinking about the human beings that are a part of our organizations. And when we have remote work, are we thinking about some of the social disparities that exist that make it different for men, women, people with disabilities, and so forth, to work within those kinds of settings. And then remote work and platform economies, they present various new risks that organizations have to be mindful of. We also have to be mindful of the psychosocial well-being that people have, the mental and emotional impacts of digital work. During COVID, for instance, now, at least from my perspective, I cannot pinpoint the reason for this exactly, but that isolation that people felt led to a lot of mental health issues during that period, right? Was the necessary support provided for individuals in those kinds of spaces? And then we also have to think about ethical and adaptive leadership, which becomes more and more important in the future world of work, and that we have to design the future of work. It's not something that should just happen to us and just happen to our organizations, but we have to be proactive in the way that we create organizations that are future fit and also staff that are future fit. And thank you very much. I think that's all from me. I don't know if any of you have any questions or would like to engage on any of the points that I discussed, but thank you so much.
Oh, thank you very much, Dr. Salebi. This was an incredibly insightful session. I specifically enjoyed all the ethical questions that you popped in there. It's something that sometimes gets left behind because we're so focused on the theory and what the research says. I see we have our first question in the comment box from Yaku Bakker, and then I will open the floor for any more questions. In a lot of cases, private higher education institutions focus a lot on the middle class skills like bookkeeping, HR administration, and paralegals, etc. Does it mean that there needs to be a complete rethink of the offering from these institutions?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Yaku. That's an excellent question. I do believe so, right? So one of the ways in which we are criticized, and I don't think it's necessarily only private higher learning institutions that are criticized in this regard, is that as institutions of higher learning, sometimes we are not responsive enough to the environments that we exist in, right? And as a result of that, we tend to have this, I guess, siloed thinking around what the important skills are, what the important programs are that we should be offering. Because just because a particular discipline has been in high demand for the last 20 or 30 years, that doesn't necessarily mean it will be 20 or 30 years from now. So as researchers, we also have to be thinking about what the future of certain disciplines is going to look like. And I don't think it's necessarily about getting rid of entire disciplines, but we have to rethink how we present that content. We have to rethink, I think I got disconnected. Okay, I think I got disconnected for a bit there. Everything's just going wrong with the tech today. I don't know what's going on my side, but yes, I do think that there has to be a constant rethinking and reimagining of various disciplines and the usefulness of those disciplines. How do we make sure that whatever it is that we are teaching our students is actually useful to the market? Right? Because as South African institutions, what's useful within a South African context may not be as useful in a different context. And as much as, yes, we want to, like at some point at the University of Pretoria, we were calling ourselves the African Global University, right? So there was this very strong focus on, yes, we want to develop graduates that are focused on solving problems within our context, but also we want graduates that are globally relevant, which I think is fantastic, right? But it also, for us to get there and to not only have global relevance, but also to have local relevance, we have to know what local relevance actually looks like. So I think, yes, it's a very important consideration that we have to have, Yaku, that we have to be mindful of the programs that we are developing, and they have to be socially relevant, whether it is relevant socially within the particular context you exist in, or even on a larger global scale. But yes, thank you.
Great. Any other questions? You can either pop them in the comment box, or you can just open your mic and start speaking.
I don't mind comments either. I don't know if anyone agrees with Elon Musk's perspective. I'm not
Yeah, that was
certain.
a very interesting one.
Yeah.
As a person that relies heavily on remote work for the last few months, I'm very conflicted about that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because the
Well,
reality is, a lot of people work very well remotely. I think I work quite well remotely, right? So I think it's also on individual basis. But I just found it interesting that he had that perspective, especially considering how forward-thinking he is in a lot of other ways or other aspects.
yeah, I also think that I'm more productive at home because I'm an absolute chatterbox. So if I'm in the office, I do spend, I would say, like a third of the day just talking nonsense. So yeah, for me, but we'll see how things work out in the long run. Yes, please open your mic and go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I think I also just wanted to, first of all, thank you so much, Doctor, for the presentation. It was very insightful. But I wanted to comment on Elon Musk's comment that he thinks remote working is closest. And in the environment I work in, I find that to be very true. For example, only people on a certain level get like subsidies for cell phone and data. I think also looking at the summative project that we have on digital transformation, I think part of the gaps that I have discovered in my own organization is the digital okay, the word will come back. But where other people have access to digital tools and they're able to do more, where others are more disadvantaged. So when we look at that, people on higher levels, because we get we've got laptops, other people use desktops, we get cell phone allowance. It means we're able to thrive more digitally as opposed to the others. And the question is, how do we then move the entire organization forward digitally, where others, the word is digital divide, where there's a vast digital divide. And the more you work on digital instruments, the more you have an interest and the more you can learn and more you're exposed to even other things. But if you find people like cleaners, for example, we have an online leave system, but their supervisors upload that on their behalf. They don't even have a central PC that they all use to upload their own leaves. So I'm agreeing with Elon that it's a closest thing. I can easily say, oh, colleagues, I'll take all my meetings from home. But there's somebody that doesn't have that opportunity, those resources, infrastructure. They don't come from a home where there is Wi-Fi. I know we take for granted because we're all on this platform, but there are other homes that literally people will say, please buy me data. And for us, when we get inside our home, our devices connect to this Wi-Fi that we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I think it's a very insightful comment because the reality is, again, that context definitely matters, all right? Because in the South African context, I mean, I had a conversation with a colleague of mine earlier today, and I was telling him that, you know, South Africa, it's basically like 2, 3, 4 worlds in one, right? We still have issues in South Africa of, for instance, a student walking into a university and interacting with a computer for the first time within a university setting, right? That still happens. So within the university environment, for instance, you could have 2 students sitting side by side, one who grew up with a computer in the home, and that's something we take so much for granted, is that your digital literacy actually starts from the time you're a child, right? Your ability to feel comfortable around digital devices. That starts from the time that we're really young. When I was a child, I had a computer in the home, and that's something that I never really thought of as being a source of privilege, but it was. And I don't know if any of you have seen on social media, people have this running joke of, you know, kids these days, when they interact with technology, they're just, you know, clicking away, and they're so confident with the way that they use it. When we were kids, we would draw on paint, right? So they you know, paint on our computers. But already at that stage, you were developing a level of comfort around technology, that a child who is interacting with a computer properly for the first time at the age of 18 or 19 still has to develop that, right? So the divide that we see, it cuts across various levels of society. So it doesn't start in the workplace. That divide actually starts long before we actually start working in the work environment. So again, there are so many social structures that we have to consider. I mean, for instance, and that's why even as professionals, we always have to be conscious of the environment that we find ourselves in. Before we even implement certain technologies, implement certain changes, we have to be mindful of, are we bringing people along for those changes? Are we potentially isolating certain individuals as a result of us wanting to innovate, right? Those are all things that we have to think about. Because a colleague of mine and I had a conversation about this as well, where they're exceptionally tech savvy. And they wanted us to move from a certain paper-based test for a very large group of students. So there's about 600 students in this particular module. And they wanted us to move from paper-based tests to online tests, right? And we just put all the students in this huge computer room. But one thing that I noticed when we tried it for one semester is that students from disadvantaged environments struggled so much with those tests. that actually paper-based tests were better for those students. So these are all things that we have to consider. We don't just innovate for the sake of it, but we innovate to increase efficiencies and to bring people along for the process. So yeah, so it's something that we greatly have to consider and be mindful of.
We have two questions in the comments. I'm just going to go to Venzile's question first and then Dr. Ruan. Venzile says, you mentioned that there is excitement around technology. Is the excitement spread equally across the work environment? And then a second question also, do you think with the increase of top level skills, is this paired with the increase in new businesses, or are organizations becoming top heavy or bloated at the top?
Okay, great question. So in terms of the first question, Wenzile, about the excitement about technology, it's definitely not equally spread throughout organizations, definitely not. At the university, about 3 years ago, we ran a study looking at digital skills. And we looked at various levels of individuals within the university. So all the way from an assistant lecturer or a student assistant tutor, all the way up to some of your top professors, right? And one of the things that we found was that a person could be the absolute greatest expert, world-renowned experts, professors on specific phenomena or specific areas and disciplines, but the levels of digital fluency were sometimes lower than a tutor, right? So that's why it's not surprising when you find that a person who's maybe been at an institution for a lot longer tend to be more set in their ways and tend to be much more intimidated by the introduction of different technologies, right? So in our team is quite small and it's a very young team, right? So a lot of the people that work within our team at the center are in their early 20s, early to mid 20s, right? Whenever we say this AI platform is not as good as that one, we're switching over to another one, everybody just says, oh, cool, let's move over to this new platform instead of the one that we've been using. But not everyone is as comfortable with trying out new types of technology, because sometimes the levels of digital fluency are not where they need to be, right? So the levels of excitement definitely are not the same across the work environment, because not everyone has the same levels of comfortability around these kinds of technologies. And then also the second question, now this is a toughie, that do I think that the top level skills, when we see an increase in top level skills, does that lead to an increase in new businesses, or would it potentially lead to top heavy or bloated organizations at the top? That's a question that I can't really answer at this stage because I'm not sure, right? But my assumption is that, because remember that when we think about the cognitive economy, we're not just talking about skills that are being developed so that certain individuals can be absorbed by different organizations, right? These are skills that people are developing in general, and if we couple that with an entrepreneurial culture, naturally the kinds of individuals that come out of the knowledge economy will start developing their own businesses and ways of doing things, which we are seeing, right? Now, whether or not we're seeing a greater uptake in individuals within the knowledge economy starting up their own businesses as opposed to joining organizations, that's something I can't really answer because I don't have the statistics around that. But again, one area that institutions of higher learning are being criticized on is that we still develop graduates to work within organizations. We don't develop graduates to be entrepreneurs. That's something that we are not seeing as much of as we should be. So again, it's a criticism, I think, to the way that our education institutions tend to be developed, is that we tend to focus on and teach young people that you go to university to get a job, not that you go to university to acquire certain skills that could potentially be useful in a variety of ways, which is, again, you could start your own thing. So it's a difficult question to answer, but I will say that part of my critique is that institutions of higher learning, we also need to couple the skills that we are providing students with entrepreneurial ability and potentially also entrepreneurial opportunity as well. Yeah.
Thank you very much. That's a great answer. I made some notes myself when you started talking about the higher education institutions. Then from our lecturer on this module, Dr. van der Berg, specifically on people-centric versus tech-centric, do you think that we, humanity as a whole, will strike the right balance? Or do you think we will end up driving it beyond the point of no return? The theoretical point of singularity, where tech potentially becomes intrusive, disruptive, uncontrollable, and end up with disillusionment, self-destruction, and paying massive school fees in the process, seeing that this is seemingly completely unregulated or protocoled. Will we cross the line? We should not cross.
Yeah, that's a challenging one. Unfortunately, with the way things are going currently, I get so intimidated when my fellow colleagues ask me questions, Dr. van den Berg. But from my perspective, the way things are going, I'm a little bit nervous about the potential for us to cross the line, right? Because again, from my perspective, I don't think we are keeping up as humanity. We are keeping up with the innovation that's taking place. So the chances of us running into certain issues in terms of the way that technology is used, the way it's developing, what's considered ethical and unethical, right? Potentially we could cross that line. And from my perspective, we talk a lot about, especially as academics, we talk about interdisciplinarity, transdisciplinarity. We throw these terms around, but we don't actually see a lot of that actually being implemented. And it's through that interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity that we prevent some of these issues, right? Because the reality is the technologists are over here developing their technologies, innovating as they should, right? But are the technologists interacting with or asking the ethicists what they think about those technologies and the potential ramifications of those technologies? That's not happening as much as it should be, right? So part of the reason that I do think that potentially we could run into several issues when it comes to the way that we innovate is because different disciplines are not talking to each other. I bumped into, and this was probably a year ago, 2 years ago, a young lady. She's an ethicist, and she's currently conducting research on, now it's a controversial one, but this is the conversation that we had. She's conducting research with her students on sex robots, right? So what she is doing is she's doing research on the potential effects of technologies of that nature, right? But once she has those findings and she finds that, you know, the findings are awful and, you know, we shouldn't be developing technologies like that, right? Will the technologists actually listen to that kind of research, right? Because their job as technologists is to develop these technologies, regardless of what people perceive as a moral or use of technology or an immoral use, right? Because that's based on different people's perceptions. But from an ethics perspective, she thinks that these technologies can be used very badly, right? So if a person takes a robot and they abuse that robot, right? Is that a real thing? Can you abuse a robot? And if you do, what effect does that have on the brain of a person that already potentially might have some issues in that regard, right? So the issue that I'm seeing is that we probably could potentially end up crossing the line in various ways. And a big part of the reason for that is because we are not taking transdisciplinarity as seriously as we should be. So various fields need to be working together to figure out how certain technologies should be used and what is ethical and unethical and socially potentially good for society or potentially bad for society.
That is a doozy. You're asking questions about if they're abusing the robots. I was thinking about what happens to the person that interacts with the robots.
So there's so many things to consider, right?
There's so many things to consider.
Yeah, there's a
All
lot
of
to
a sudden,
consider.
my field seems very simple and straightforward. Okay. We have a question here from Karisni. Do you think the current higher education system is adequately preparing students for an AI-driven economy, especially in terms of soft skills, or is there a structural gap? If so, what concrete changes should universities make to better embed soft skills into their curricula and teaching practices?
So, in terms of preparing students for soft skills, the difficulty with soft skills is they're developed usually in practice, right? So with a lot of soft skills, we develop these skills as we implement certain ways of being, right? So as we are interacting with other human beings, reading other human beings, responding to them and reacting to certain things, we're developing our soft skills. The challenge, I feel, with the development of soft skills within higher learning institutions is the number of students that we typically have, right? Developing soft skills requires a strong level of mentorship as well that we don't tend to see as much in institutions of higher learning. So I have a module that I'm teaching currently. I think, Andrea, I think it's the one that we taught on last year. Was it 310 or 313? But whichever one, I'm back on one of those again this year.
Okay.
And I have a very, I'm back on 310, and it's a very large cohort of students. So we teach about 600 students annually on that particular module, and that's not even the largest module within our department. There are some with over 1,000 students within those modules, and as a result of that, there's no real mentorship that's happening, right? So if a student has a certain encounter or they have a certain issue, if you have a mentor or if you have a good relationship with your lecturer, you're able to go to them and consult, and through that consultation develop over time certain soft skills and abilities to problem solve, to think critically, to read the room, and so forth. So the biggest barrier to students being able to develop those soft skills within university spaces is the number of students that we actually have to deal with. So again, we do try interventions like mentorship here and there, getting young professionals to mentor certain individuals, but usually that only takes place from postgrad level, because at undergrad level the numbers are still very challenging to be able to do that. So again, it's difficult to say what the concrete things are that we could do, but I do believe that part of it is also maybe using technology as well to improve access to mentorship. Because it's through your practical implementation of certain skills and being able to interact with people that can guide you in the development of those skills that you are actually able to develop those skills. But another thing that we can do, but again, students would have to take the initiative to do that, is that there are various platforms now, online platforms, that help you with the development of certain soft skills, right? I don't know if you have it at Emirates or access to it, the LinkedIn Learning, right? Because I know I know at UP we do have it. But again, students have to go out of their way to access a short course on critical thinking and critical skills, critical thinking. They have to go out of their way and access those courses on problem solving. Because that's not part of the curriculum. We can integrate some aspects of it, but it's difficult to do that without you as an individual going the extra mile. So the best that we can do as institutions is to provide access to those kinds of platforms and encourage students to use them. That would be the best that I think we could do, and access to mentorship as well.
Yeah, completely agree with the mentorship. From my experience, undergraduate students are quite fatigued when it comes almost the information overload. It's as if they don't have the capacity to go do that additional LinkedIn learning or whatever, even if they wanted to, because they're just so fatigued with everything else that they need to do. So it does happen more comfortably in the postgraduate space. I see we have a hand. Georgia Jade, you can go ahead.
Hi, good evening, Doctor. First of all, such a privilege to listen to you tonight. And honestly, everything has been so insightful to hear. So thank you. Thank you so much. I had to write down my examples or my questions because it was a lot to comment on. But I think the most important takeaway that I found was your example of Timberland, and the AI artist really challenged my perspective, particularly when considering the trade-off of taking away jobs from human artists. And the reason why is, while that is a trade-off, my first thought was, well, if they do it better, is that not what we want? And this train of thought is really connected to certain fields that, like the medical field, where if a robot can perform microscopic surgeries, for example, to reduce mortality rates or even just malpractice rates, is this not perhaps a great thing, where the introduction of AI or technology is replacing humans is better? But I cycled back to the end user when we went back to that example of in terms of music. And I sort of cycled back to the user and thought about, but why is music made? And it's for humans.
Yeah.
And we think about music provides an emotional experience, or forgive me, an emotional service even. And I think that's again where it really depends on the field you're in. But I'd love to hear your thought on that, because I just felt like that was such an amazing train of thought to go off on.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Georgia Jade. So it's the conversations around the future of work are always so challenging, because again, these technologies are awesome, but they also present their own challenges. One of the reasons I feel that we are kind of protective of the arts, right? Because again, a lot of different fields have encountered some level of disruption because of AI and other technologies. But the reason I think that we are quite sensitive about music in different forms of artistry is that it is uniquely human, right, to produce that kind of like music, and it's something that is very very much tied to our identity as human beings is creativity, right? Our ability to create interesting things, to create music and art and so forth, right? Another thing that as humans we tend to become attached not only to the art itself but to the artist as well. So the difficulty with AI, and as much as AI music is becoming more and more popular, people are still not really connecting necessarily with these AI artists, right? So the connection between us and the person who creates the art that we enjoy and respect, that's still something that we tend to desire as humans. So it really does go with the field that you exist in. So I think you're correct in also in that regard, that if a doctor could do their job better using technology, why can't an artist do their job better as well using technology? But also, when I just as I say that, there's a difference between being completely a certain work form being completely usurped by technology and being used to enhance the work that you do, right? So a surgeon who makes use of technology to do their job better, that's seen as productive and useful, because again, the technology is supporting the human. So we're not as sensitive about the use of technology, actually not sensitive about it at all, if it supports a human in the work that they do. But immediately it replaces the human completely, then that's when we become a lot more sensitive. So I don't think people are against a person using AI to help them make a beat, right? But bringing in a human artist to then come and sing the song or whatever it is. But when AI completely takes over the entire work of a person, that's where we then tend to become a bit more sensitive about it. So again, technology is fine if it's used to support the human, but not to replace them completely.
Yes, completely agree. Completely agree, Dr. Salebi. I don't see any I have a few comments. Massive wisdom in your answer, food for thought. Thank you. Thank you so much for the awesome presentation. Grateful to be to have been able to attend. So lots of positive feedback in the comment section. I think we did go about 16 minutes over time, but I don't think anyone really had a problem with that. Thank you very, very much, Dr. Salebi, for your time and coming to speak to us. I think everybody thoroughly enjoyed themselves. It was a lot of things to think about, and I think there was a lot of little golden nuggets that the students might refer back to when they have to choose topics for their dissertation by the end of the year. So I would save this recording and maybe listen back to it. So by the time we get to proposals, there's a lot of good topics to use. I don't know, is there anything, Dr. van der Berg, is there anything from your side that you'd like to maybe just announce to the class or anything before we say goodbye to our guest speaker?
Thanks, Andrea, and thank you, Dr. O. It was awesome hosting you. Thanks for putting this meeting together, Andrea. Yeah, I think we heard a lot of things. I also made a lot of notes, and definitely it's going to be one of the recordings that we are definitely going to revisit. Thank you very much. Nothing else from my side. I'll quickly check in with the class after.
Sure.
But thank you. Thanks all.
Okay, thank you very much. Then it is goodbye from myself and Dr. Salebi. You guys have my email address. You are always welcome to send me any queries or concerns, but I'm sure you are very comfortable with Dr. van der Berg going forward. Have a lovely evening, and hopefully I'll see you soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.
All right. That was quite interesting, hey guys. Yeah, very nice. What a pleasant lady. Yeah, I must tell you, being a bit of a human person myself, I'm glad to hear that we can make the statement that business is human. Hey, I'm always on the business is human bandwagon, but there's definitely a massive drive to take some of that, and yeah, there's definitely a place for humans as social beings, and I'm encouraged by what she said. Interesting times. Guys, I want to say something with regards to the assignment. We've had some questions. Thank you, Lidi. Lidi raised a couple of questions for the formative Again, assignment 2 is going through the whole moderation process. Remember, it's a moderated module. You guys submitted on the 6th. So thank you very much. So far, from what I've seen, I like what I see. I've seen very little people being penalized for the same things that we saw. So kudos for that. Again, it will take a bit of time to get the marks out, guys. Remember, ICE, if you haven't done your ICE tasks, please look at the announcements. Please look at the WhatsApp group. Please make sure that you got your ICE mark in hand by Friday the 10th. That's tomorrow. And then I thought what I'm going to do is, because as there are questions coming in regarding the summative, I'm going to put together something, and I'll maybe put it to you either in a video recording or in a document, just giving you some guidance on how we want to tackle the summative. The presentations, it's going to be difficult for us. We're not gonna put up a formal session, a scheduled or a timetabled session, as it were, for the presentations. We don't have to synchronize everyone's diaries. From what I've discussed with Dr. Andrea, we will set up the presentations in a way, in a format, in a time and a place that works for us. So I will be definitely in touch with you guys very soon about that, and then also put together some guidance to address uncertainties, questions regarding the summative. So that is on its way. Don't worry, don't stress. Make sure that you've got your ICE mark. Wait for the feedback on assignment 2, which we're going to get out to you as soon as it's possibly humanly possible. There is a bit of a turnaround because of moderation. And then some info forthcoming regarding the summative. And that's it, folks. So yeah, so you will see me again. We will interact again in the summative. So this is not the last farewell. Thank you very much. I must say it now. It was such a privilege to spend this 10 weeks with you guys. It was so enriching, so interesting, and so wonderful to interact with you guys. There's a question. I'm aware that we present online. However, do we submit presentation slides on ARC? Yes, you will. I think that's always a good idea for you to submit your slideshow on ARC so that we have that on record, if that's what you're asking, Angelina. Yes, that's always a good idea to submit everything on that. Yes, so you will submit your presentation on the very same link where you submit the rest. That's how it's yes, on due date. So obviously we'll do the presentations in proximity to the submission date. The submission date, I think that will apply. Submit whatever you have to submit there, and then the actual presentations we will do. RRC, there's a thumbs up. We will do in proximity. I need to also go through everything, talk with Andrea, get my head around everything, and make sure that all expectations are managed, and that we don't miss a thing, and that we address all the things. What I'm actually planning to do is to forward the questions that I've had so far from students, to put those together in a collaborative document and send that off to all you guys, so that all possible questions are answered and that no one feels uncertain in any way. I think that's it, folks. I don't see anything else. I'm going to let you off the hook. Wonderful, exciting times, eh? It's so wonderful, and it's such a privilege to be an educated person in this country, eh? And there's wonderful opportunities. I liked it when she said that you guys are sitting on the high sort of spot of that U shape, and that there's lots of opportunity for all of us. That's it. Make a difference. Speak to you soon, and I will be in touch. Take care, folks.